Thank you very much. As Minnie mentioned, I'm going to speak in English. One of the great strengths of the fintech sector and the ecosystem as a whole in Israel is that it's very global. It's very much facing outwards, looking to find solutions for the world. So I hope at least this one time you'll forgive us for speaking in English. But feel free to ask questions in Hebrew if you want as well. And I'll try and get through this presentation reasonably quickly to leave time for questions. I enjoy answering questions, so we'll make sure that there is enough time for that. So over the following weeks, you're going to be hearing a lot about the specific solutions that Israeli fintech offers and a lot of the specific issues that it has to deal with. Today, I want to give you an overall overview at a very high level of what's in the fintech sector. And you'll get an idea of exactly how strong it is, how broad it is, and really why it's one of the most successful and strongest sectors within the Israeli high-tech ecosystem. Okay, so let me just tell you briefly about the organization I work for, called Startup Nation Central. You can see here some of the things we do. We're a non-profit organization. We were founded about 8 years ago. And we do really 3 different types of activities. One of them is what we call Connection to the World. So we bring delegations of large multinationals to Israel to meet with Israeli startups and to try and help them solve some of their problems and make connections for them to find potential customers and investors. We create Connection to Israel. So we help startups themselves to connect with the people that they need to connect to. And finally, Knowledge and Insights. That's the department I work in. So first of all is Finder, Startup Nation Finder. This is a free online database, as it shows at the bottom, finder startupnationcentral.org. You can go online, you can search for any type of Israeli startups, you can use searching tags, you can look for fintech, you could look for payments, you could look for trading, any of those kinds of things, and you can see all the Israeli startups in that particular field. You can look at their profile and you can see their history and the various things that they've done. So I urge you to make use of it. It's a very good resource and totally free and online. We also do engagements, as it mentions here, with clients from abroad. And then research, we use the data that we have from Finder in order to publish reports. And a lot of the data that I'm going to present to you now comes from our Finder database. We also use that to publish reports and blogs, etc. If you go to our website, which isn't Finder, it's just startupnationcentral.org, we have a resource page there, and you can go to the fintech section and you can see previous reports and other resources that we publish there that you may find to be very useful. Okay, this is just about the Finder search platform. This is various things that it has. We'll skip over that. Okay, let's talk a bit about now what's going on within the Israeli fintech sector itself. So if you look at the graph on the left-hand side, we divide fintech into 7 different sectors. There's different ways you can do it. But this is the way we decided to do it because we wanted to show just how broad the sector is. So the largest subsector in terms of the number of companies in the subsector is trading and investing, counts for 24%, followed by payments, enterprise solutions, anti-fraud, insurtech, lending and financing, personal finance management. So you can see how very broad the sector is, all these different types of solutions, which are very, very different to each other, all work in different parts of the market. And what's interesting is in almost every single one of them, there's really a critical mass of Israeli startups that exist there. And so in any one of those areas, you can find solutions and you can find entrepreneurs getting into that sector. On the right-hand side, you can see what stage different startups in the sector are up to. And what's interesting here is, again, there's quite a broad range. So on the left-hand side, you can see companies who've raised A rounds, B rounds, C rounds. Those are the companies we kind of normally think about when we think about fintech companies or successful fintech companies. There's also a lot of companies who've just raised a seed round. A quarter of companies have just raised seed round. Many of them are still young. A lot of companies are bootstrapped. And a lot of companies are what we call established, which is companies who've been around for 15 years plus, haven't raised money, but are still functioning and still profitable. So it's both a developed sector in terms of the fact that many companies have raised a lot of money and have successful products. It's also quite a young sector in terms of the fact there's still many companies who are just starting off and who either haven't raised a round or have only raised a seed round so far. Also interesting to point out, 80% of the companies are B2B or B2B2C, which is somewhat typical of the Israeli ecosystem. We're very much a B2B ecosystem, but particularly in fintech, the solutions are generally aimed at businesses and not at consumers. Well, 75% already have a product release. So even if companies haven't necessarily reached a late funding stage, they have already got a released product. And that's also one of the outstanding features of the fintech sector, that with relatively little money or quite early on in their lifetime, it's easy to get to a released product, as opposed to other sectors where it takes a long time to develop the product, to pass regulation, and many other things that need to get a product out. So that's another one of the strengths of the fintech sector. Okay, this is the chart you've seen already, so I won't bother showing you that again. Let's have a look at investment now. This shows really the strength of the fintech sector. Raised over $1 billion, both in 2019 and 2020. This year, it's more than double that sum. In fact, it's closer to 2.5 times the sum, and the year isn't finished yet. So by the end of the year, we might even be doing 3 times that. And that really demonstrates how strongly fintech has performed during the pandemic, the increase in demand for fintech services as a result of remote work, remote commerce, and all those other things that came from the pandemic. But even before that, this was one of Israel's strongest sectors, as you can see from the sums of money that have been raised there. Okay, if you look at it within the total ecosystem, again, you can see how strong it is. So currently this year, it's 24% of all funding of the whole ecosystem, so almost a quarter. So it's just behind cyber, enterprise solutions, but it's still one of the strongest sectors, and it's jumped considerably since 2020. So it's very strong. It's an upward streak. And if we look on the right-hand side, we can see it actually represents 26% of Israel's unicorns. So even stronger than the amount of funding is the number of unicorns it's been able to generate. And you may have noticed that if you follow things in the media, when new unicorns are announced, it does seem like every second one is in fintech. And so many of them do come from the fintech sector, and it's been very successful in being able to produce companies that have reached that stage. This is a piece of research done by CB Insights, and this is a global consultancy that follows the tech sector. So every year they produce their list of top 250 fintech companies, and of those from the list this year, 17 were Israeli. It's a bit hard to see here, quite small, but you can see names like Chipotle. The point is, Forta. The point is that Israel has a high number of entrants to this particular list. So it's very much globally understood, received by the world fintech community, and that Israel is one of the major players in this particular sector. Let's have a look at the subsectors now. And this is one of the most interesting slides, I think. So you can see for the last 3 years how much money was raised in each of the 7 subsectors, which I mentioned earlier. The first thing I want to point out is, if you remember from that earlier slide, in terms of the number of companies, the largest subsector was trading and investing. But trading and investing isn't the largest subsector when it actually comes to fundraising. It's actually right down the list, number 5. The largest subsector by far is payments. And you can see that at the top, it's not just that payments has been strong, but it's really taken off even more in 2021. It's probably the biggest winner out of all the subsectors in terms of who benefited from Corona and who saw biggest increase in demand, whether it was from businesses, whether it was from consumers, just to facilitate all the extra e-commerce that took place. There was a huge increase in demand, and we saw both amongst Israeli startups that they increased their revenues very strongly during the pandemic. And we also saw that investors decided that many of these startups would grow much more strongly than they'd expected in the past, and therefore they were willing to invest a lot more money in those startups. So payments is now by far the dominant subsector. Enterprise solutions has also grown very rapidly. And that's also a result of remote working, remote commerce, and companies need software solutions to be able to manage their operations. Anti-fraud, again, we saw a lot of increase in fraud during the pandemic, so that's also seen its numbers go up a lot. And then we have some of the other subsectors which haven't been as strong, but they've all raised more money this year than they did the previous year. Looking at mega rounds this year, so mega rounds are around over 100 million. We've seen there've been a lot this year, so 14 so far this year. It may even be higher since we compiled this data at the end of last month. And it's not just that they're 100 million rounds. You can see at the top here, there's 300 million rounds as well. Some very strong rounds. And as you can see, almost every company that's raised a mega round this year is a unicorn. So they've all got valuations of $1 billion and higher. What's also interesting is it's actually quite diverse by subsectors. So even though we see a lot of payments companies here, we also see some anti-fraud companies, some insurtech companies, some enterprise companies. So we've seen some very large rounds raised across a number of different subsectors. And that just goes back to what I was saying earlier about how diverse the sector is. Now let's talk about exits. It's been a very strong year for exits in general, and it's also been a very strong year for exits in fintech. So here we have a number of different acquisitions that took place of Israeli companies. You can see the names of the Israeli companies on the left-hand side. And so that's been a major source of exits this year in terms of acquisitions. And if you look at this slide, we can see companies that went public through IPO or through a SPAC. There's only one SPAC that's actually closed so far this year. There's a number that are still in process, but SPACs have been a popular way to go public for a number of these companies. But we've also seen quite a few do IPOs. That wasn't so popular in the past. It was harder to go public through IPOs. The market is much more receptive now for fintech companies, at least with a decent amount of revenue, to be able to go public through an IPO. And Riskified is kind of the best example of that so far this year. Let's look at the pipeline for a second. So this tells you the number of deals that have happened by different stages. So if we look at 2021, we can see for the most later stages from Series C onwards, we've had 21 rounds, which is far higher than any other year. That's not really surprising because as the ecosystem matures and there are more startups reaching a later stage, and obviously there's more startups eligible to raise more money. So if there's more money around, then it's not surprising that many of these companies are raising those later rounds. Series A to B, that's slightly higher than last year, not quite as high as 2018 or 2019, but the year hasn't finished yet. Probably will end up a bit higher. What I think is very interesting is actually the seed stage funding. So that's the lowest bar, the light blue. We've had 33 seed rounds this year, which is higher than 2019 and 2020. And what's interesting is that normally at this stage of the year, the number is lower than the previous year because there's a bit of a time lag in how long it takes us to get the data on seed stage rounds. They're not usually published immediately. And already this year, we've seen 33. The real number is probably much higher. We just don't know about a lot of these rounds. And my guess is when the full data comes in, we will have even more rounds than we had in 2018 when we had 45 seed rounds. And what this tells us is that the sector also has a very strong pipeline of younger companies that are underway, that have been formed, that are raising seed rounds. And so it's not just about the mature companies that are very successful now, reaching unicorn status. There's also a lot of younger companies being started, and therefore, the sector has a strong future in terms of a number of new companies to come through. Okay, now let's try and talk a bit about the why. This is a lot more difficult, but here's some ideas that we've put together as to why Israel's been so successful in the realm of fintech. So first of all is the issue of government support. So the government targeted fintech quite a while ago and decided they wanted fintech to be a strong sector in Israel. And the way they did it is they gave tax breaks to multinational companies to set up R&D centers in Israel. And this was very successful. We saw a number of very large banks, financial institutions from around the world, some of the leading ones, set up R&D centers in Israel. The tax breaks expired, but most of them have stayed, and these R&D centers remained. Now, what this did is this raised the bar for the fintech sector in Israel. So when somebody was starting a startup here based in Israel, they knew they could go to many of the world's leading banks who were sitting on their doorsteps here in Israel, and it could help them to build their product, help them to test it out, and they could build their product around the needs of the largest, most profitable global institutions. And so that was a huge boost to the local ecosystem. It also helped in terms of actually personnel. Many people went to work for these institutions in Israel, and they got experience there. They learned about how banking or insurance works at the highest level, and then they left and went and formed their own startups with the knowledge they'd received there. And that's something you couldn't really get in too many countries outside of the United States, maybe London as well. So human capital, experience in the army particularly gives experience in areas that most people in most countries don't get at such a young age. So whether it's to do with big data, AI, IoT, the programming experience from Shona Matayim, all those kinds of skills give a unique workforce to Israel that can get going on these kind of projects, really from nothing, put together a skilled workforce and build a product very quickly based on the skill sets that they've developed, as well as other skill sets they've learned in the army, things like leadership, teamwork. This is a kind of skill set that, again, in other countries, people just don't have, and enables people to create their own startups and to be able to work in these kind of teams from a relatively young age. The other thing is the community. So besides this community, which is obviously helping the ecosystem a lot, there's quite a few different fintech communities in Israel, and that's really helped for people to share ideas, to be able to build businesses together, and to be able to create a place where people can help each other in order to develop new ideas. Also helps in terms of being a beta site. So many local financial institutions have been willing to allow startups to test their products locally. Okay, let's continue. Many of the local financial industry has worked with the fintech sector. These are some of them here. And then finally, these are some of the institutions who really helped the ecosystem to develop here. So at the top, we have some MNCs. What's interesting is that some of them are financial institutions, such as AXA Munich Re. Some of them are just global corporates like Google, etc. And they've come here to develop fintech. So part of the R&D that they're doing here is in conjunction with fintech companies or developing their own financial institutions in-house, but based on the knowledge that's here. And that's been a big boost for the sector. Also, many banks, as I mentioned earlier, the tax breaks the government gave. So we have, the leading institutions of the world here: Citi, JP Morgan, UBS, etc. Who have their offices here, and that's helped to develop the highest standards of people to work with. There's a huge number of accelerators and hubs that are here. Again, that's helped a lot of early stage companies to develop, really give them the support they need. And then finally, there's the investors. So a lot of the local investors invest in fintech. It's one of their favorite sectors. And then there's also international investors who also very much looking for fintech solutions. We've seen some of the largest global investors invest this year in many of the Israeli startups doing some of those mega rounds. And so that's been also a big support for the sector. So I think I've just about kept to my time. Thank you all very much for listening.